Hey folks, welcome to the E3. Welcome to the E3 Coliseum, aka Jeff Keighley's Circus of Wonder and Amazement. This is like the Future of Narrative division. So we're really happy to have you here. We'll be taking some questions from you, and I want to introduce our panel. First, we have the legendary Amy Hennig.
I'm good.
Amy, come on out. And we have Sam Barlow as well of Her Story. Good to see you, Sam. And we have Ian Sparrow from What Remains of Edith Finch. So, I'm Harold Goldberg. In New York, I run the New York Videogame Critics Circle and the New York Game Awards. And I have been writing about games for over 2 decades. So I look at myself and say, oh my God, it's really been that long. But if you know my writing at all, maybe you don't, my concern all the time has been with narrative. And the reason I stayed with games is because I saw the possibility of narrative from way back in the 1990s. So what really kind of has always enthused me is kind of this evolution. So early around 2000, I saw Dan Houser's really great work with Grand Theft Auto 3, and then in 2006, Ken Levine's BioShock really moved me. And in 2007, it was Amy Hennig's Uncharted. And Amy, I remember around that time being in Dubrovnik, yes. In a big old, centuries-old castle, and sitting there, and out comes Amy, armed with papers and ready to talk to us in the press.
I looked ready.
Well, we'll get to it. But it was really impressive. She was talking about everything from Penny Dreadful novels and to The Perils of Pauline to Indiana Jones. So, Amy, what was going through your mind then, and what did you want to do with narrative with Uncharted?
What was going through my mind that moment was I had flown to Croatia, had no sleep, put together the slide deck the night before, and then walked into a castle to give a presentation. It was a little surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was going through my mind was, well, it's the same stuff we do now, which is, how do we take the forms of narrative and media that we're so familiar with and deconstruct them and reconstruct them in an interactive context as a game, right?
Yeah.
And so all those references that we talked about back then, again, I think you were the only one in the audience who got what a penny dreadful was. Does anybody here know what a penny dreadful is? Yeah. It's sort of the precursor to comics and pulp novels, and then more elevated novels like King Solomon's Mines and Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. But the point was they were sort of cheap forms of entertainment that were about adventure and pirates and ghosts and mysteries and detectives and criminals and all this stuff. So basically, Uncharted. Yeah. I just ate all that stuff up and tried to figure out what all the tropes were. And tropes are a good thing, by the way. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Tropes and cliches are awesome. And, how we could take all those and build a game out of them.
And, what were kind of the stumbling blocks? Because that was it was a new kind of game at that point.
Well, yeah, there were tons
to say the main one.
How long do we have?
Yeah.
The stumbling blocks, of course, were, we were trying to invent something that, really didn't exist. And so, obviously the writing of the engine and all the things that go along with that.
Yeah.
And the fact that to pull something like that off, we knew that we had to have an engaging, believable protagonist that, seemed flawed and charming and needed to just be in jeans and a T-shirt and have tousled hair, all of things which were really hard to do at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
You couldn't be a bald space marine.
But you did it well and started an awesome franchise that remains to this day. Also, I want to mention that if you have questions out there on Facebook, please send them. We may or may not choose a great one. Ian, you made this great narrative leap from the fairy tale-oriented Unfinished Swan to What Remains of Edith Finch, which is about deeper things and you know how we as humans feel about death. So narratively, what did you want to do with story as you were working through Edith Finch, which took a long time?
Yeah, 4.5 years ultimately.
Yeah.
So our games don't start from a narrative perspective. They start from like a kernel of experience. And with Edith Finch, the experience was what I remembered growing up scuba diving in Washington State and seeing the ocean slope away into an infinite darkness, and what it feels like to be in a place that is simultaneously beautiful but also overwhelming. And so ultimately that became a game about the sublime. And so all of our stories were ways of creating essentially context for players to experience the sublime. And I mean, it's funny listening to you talk about Penny Dreadfuls and Solomon's Mines and all that, you know, like in the case of Edith Finch, we looked at a lot of stories from like the 1900s and 1920s that, you know, kind of predate what we think of as genre, that are, you know, that for us were about this experience. And they were narratives, but they were like very interesting, like less formal versions of that. Like there's no vampires or werewolves. It's more about the sense of the unknown, which for us was a really good fit for the game.
That sense of the unknown, of horror and terror, is done in a way that perhaps is not as cliche as a vampire story, right? It really, because it's a real person, it is at various moments very moving. And I guess one of the questions I have is, as you write, what makes something moving? How do you do that? Right?
Well, yeah, step one is not to write. So we wait to write until the very last moment. We just work on the gameplay, and we start with this context of like, you know, what if you're a baby in a bathtub, or what if you're in the middle of a dark forest, or moments that feel like they can evoke the emotions that we want. But the writing for us, you know, I can think about it as being like in the sport of curling. There's the sweeper who just like, you know, moves ahead of the whatever the thing is in curling, and that's for us what the writing and the explicit narrative does. It, you know, kind of moves and edges along the feelings. But for us, like the gameplay experience and the context, which I think King Solomon's Mines is another, like those pirates and all that, like it. A lot of that work is done for you with genre to some extent, of like creating the space. It's like setting the table, and what you actually put on top of it, you know, can come at the last minute in some ways. And it's easier because, you know, you often don't know what that context is until very late in development.
Right. And Sam, you kind of grabbed the indie world by the genitals with her story and did the groundbreaking performance of Viva Seifert. What were you trying to do with this kind of great interactive movie mystery, which is kind of different in the sense that true crime is different?
I mean, I was trying to do everything because this was my first indie gig, and I didn't know if it would be my last, because I was like, I have this much money in the bank, and if I get to the end of this, then it's done. So I was trying to do everything that I'd wanted to do. And so one of those things was I'd pitched so many times like the police procedural idea. And I was like, look, in every other medium, the police procedural, the murder mystery is you know, this evergreen genre. There's so much in it. And as a storyteller, like the detective story is this very layered, interesting story. So I wanted to figure out how do you do that in the video game space. Particularly, I wanted to play with ideas like, from the games I've made in the past, I knew that it's very easy to give you control of a character, drop you in an atmospheric 3D space, and that's just compelling. And I felt like sometimes that's like a crutch that we use. So I wanted to see, what does a game look like if we remove that? So in many ways, her story was looking at games like Gone Home and the stuff I'd done in Silent Hill, where you tell a story through often like audio tapes and diaries. And it was like, what if the whole game is the audio tapes? Like, what does it look like to actually explore the story rather than the 3D space? So those were kind of, you know, things that were in my head, and it all kind of coalesced into that game.
And it worked. I mean, all of you have proven yourself brilliantly, not only with creativity, but with sales as well. but there are always things that are kind of unforeseen. And Amy, you felt the disappointment born of those blind, buttoned-up folk who didn't get what you were trying to do fairly recently. And as game lovers, we were all deprived of an awesome Star Wars story. Pundits began to talk about the death of first-person games. What would that work? What would playing that game have shown us in terms of a new kind of narrative that you wanted to bring to it?
Well, I mean, look, I have a wheelhouse, right? I mean, if somebody hires me to make a Star Wars game, you can probably connect the dots. Yeah. And like I said, I like to deconstruct narrative and genre and IPs, as a matter of fact. And Star Wars is a fascinating thing to deconstruct. And I don't think it's any secret, because I've said this on stage before. I mean, one of the things I want to push on is the sense of camaraderie with your non-player characters. Yeah. And the importance, I mean, one of the biggest differences between, say, an Indiana Jones or an Uncharted and a Star Wars is that even though Indiana Jones has other characters around him, they're side characters. In Star Wars, they are co-protagonists and ensemble. Therefore, it allows you to push on the bounds of companion AI and kind of cooperative collaboration with other characters within the game, which is something I'm still fascinated by, right? Because I feel like that's where the connection comes from. Mm-hmm. That's about as much as I can probably say.
Well, and also, I mean, I think, and I've heard from other game developers this year that the idea of say, a AAA game and an NPC perhaps knowing more is becoming very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, we always talk about the uncanny valley, but the uncanny valley isn't in rendering, it's in AI, right? So we've all seen beautifully rendered characters that as soon as they start speaking, or as soon as you start doing something unexpected, they are sort of exposed as sort of great moments with Mr. Lincoln, right? They're not really interacting with you, right? Exactly. And so we can keep pushing on the visual boundaries, but if we don't actually conquer the AI boundaries, then, it's all smoke and mirrors, right?
Right. I mean, I actually have kind of felt over the years that the visuals have been okay with me since last generation, right? Getting better and better, and seeing pockmarks of people's face is nice, but it really doesn't. I mean, that's not narrative, which I love. Ian, what inspires you right now, that may have an impact on your future storytelling? On your blog, I see everything from essays about Rachel Bloom's Jap Battle rap to haiku to The Leftovers.
Yeah, lately I've been really interested in the way that animals move. So I'm actually taking like a year off from active game development to go back to school and study animation. So I spend a lot of time like photographing crows and little children who move in fascinating ways. I mean, they're so much more expressive. And I think for me, like the narratives that I really like a lot of them are very animation driven. Like way to, especially like Ico and Shadow of the Colossus and Last Guardian. Like I think for me, like the most interesting NPC interaction I can recall in games would be from Ico. Where it's just the way that an awkward, like a tall, prepubescent or just pubescent girl, is going to hold hands with, like a feisty kid. Is like there's so much character in that. And I feel like as game developers, we don't really tap into that, because even, just getting the basic, like, for characters to run or climb ladders or whatever, like you can spend your whole game development time getting ladder foot placement, to be right. But, I think we're at a point where we should be thinking about more interesting problems now.
Well, and even in the blog, there was a GIF that you put up, which was animation about someone who had done an earthquake. And you wanted everyone to look at each thing that was moving, because it was each item had this kind of different movement, because it was made of ceramic or a book or something like that. It was pretty cool. So how is this going to influence your next game?
Oh, well, that's the beautiful thing, is I have no idea. That's why I work with a very, very small team and don't have the pressure of having to figure out what it is for a long time. So, I mean, the plan is to spend a couple of years and just be making things that are evoking whatever it is that, like, because I can feel it. Like, I look at a bird landing on a branch and I can sense, like, oh, there's something really wonderful. And natural, and you feel this connection in the way that like you feel with an NPC. Like I feel that when I look at a crow landing on a branch, and it's not. I mean, it's like it's wonderful and magical, but it's also right outside. Like you could just turn your head probably wherever you are 90 degrees, and if you wait long enough, you'll see the magic happen. And I would love to make a game that can kind of give players a chance to explore that, and appreciate the world around them.
Or the cat going like that at the bird, back.
Yeah.
That's, like I could watch that all day. Sam, sometimes the company you're with helps to make a game better. So what is working with Annapurna going to do to make your next narrative telling lives even better?
That's a good question. Ian can probably speak to that as well, having had them help Edith Finch over the finish line. I think one of the beautiful things with her story was coming out of like 10 years making kind of traditional, this was like pre-digitally, like games that have to be made and gold mastered and put in a box and put on a truck and then driven across the United States to a store. Because of how that process physically worked, everything was kind of driven by the marketing was will the buyer at GameStop put this game on the shelf, right? And that drove a lot of your process and who you're making games for. With her story, and it was my kind of first digital indie title, it was amazing to find this whole other audience that existed. And people will write to me and say, oh, I haven't played a game for 20 years, and I played her story, or my daughter installed it on my own phone for me. Lots of people playing it with their partners at home, and that was very exciting to me because one of my heroes is Hitchcock, and the beautiful thing with Hitchcock is as much as he was a very strange, weird man who made very personal movies, these were movies that touched millions and millions of people. So coming off of her story, I was very interested in how do I continue to expand this audience, find people who are not playing traditional video games, but really get the appeal of these interactive narratives. And so, working with Annapurna gives me some of the experience that they bring from their movie side. It gives access to talent, and just really, it's like a like-minded partner. I think coming off of her story, I didn't necessarily need to work with someone, but when I started speaking with Annapurna, everyone was very much on the same page.
Like-minded and absent-minded. I think they tend to stay out of the way a lot of the time.
That's good. That's good. You have to do your creative thing, so that's important. The idea of someone who doesn't play games, perhaps sitting next to you on the couch and helping out, whether it's Uncharted or L.A. Noire or her story, is kind of a beautiful thing because at some point that person is going to want to take the controller and try it out. But and who knows what'll happen after that, right?
Well, and it's crazy that we're not actually making games for those people. So that's my hope for the future of narrative games, right? Is that we're still kind of niche-y, and we find anecdotally that people who don't consider themselves gamers are attracted to what we're making, but they have to discover it by accident through the Trojan horse of somebody in their family who is a gamer. So what's changing that we can actually reach those people and have them want to participate in these, interactive experiences? Make it accessible for them.
I mean, I guess because of all the devices, it's more and more accessible. But we gave Todd Howard the Legend Award at the New York Game Awards last year, and one of the things he said in his speech was that it's exactly what you're saying, that we're still trying to be accepted as an industry on a very wide scale. So is that something that is an eternal goal to get more people who aren't gamers to play?
Well, I think it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, for the same reason that Sam was saying, and we're kind of getting past the tyranny of brick and mortar and what that enforced on the games. I mean, I think one of our shared concerns about AAA is that we're still sort of chasing this sort of difficult goal of more and more content, more length, and then all the things that come with that. But once we have other means of getting content through subscription services and other players enter the game, like Netflix and Apple and Amazon, as well as the familiar publishers, I think it changes the game. And I think that there's going to be a desire for content, interactive content, that is not that far removed than what people can see on Netflix, but now they get to actually experience it. As long as we get past the barrier of this sort of 15 or 20 button controller that most people are intimidated by.
I think that was the thing with Her Story was it just snuck up on people, because you have people that can send text messages, they can Google, they can use their phones, they can navigate Netflix, and so they're down with the device. Yeah. And if you present them something that doesn't look terrifying, so in Her Story's case, here is video footage, and there is a genre you recognize. And I think, to your point earlier, genre is so important because, especially with interactivity, if you're asking me to put in a little bit of extra effort to interact, I need to know what are the rules. I need to know, I need to be able to imagine what is in it for me. What am I going to get out of this? So if I know the kind of swashbuckling action-adventure genre, I'm like, oh, well, I get to do X, Y, Z, and then it's your job to make sure you can do X, Y, Z in the way that I'm imagining it. But I think that really helps bring people in. Yeah. So, telling people with Her Story, it's a police procedural, it's a murder mystery. Oh, I get what my role is. I get what's exciting about this. Yeah.
So I think it has to do more with distribution than it has to do with people wanting it. I think, they have to be able to discover it, and then we have to have the means for them to discover it.
So Amy, when you mentioned the word barrier, it came to mind that one of the things we do with the New York Video Game Critics Circle in New York is mentor kids in the Bronx at a school called the Dream Yard. And we're teaching them how to write narrative and write game reviews as well. So how do you get more narrative designers and narrative writers who are people of color?
Well, look, I mean, I think we actually have a very diverse audience. We just have to make sure these people feel that they can aspire to being creators, right? It's not that I don't think there's a lack of interest there. There's just, I think there's, societal barriers that get in the way of people achieving that dream. And so I admire people that have organizations that are sparking young people and realizing they can be part of the industry.
Ian?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough thing because I think historically, in order to make a game, it required so many, sort of mathy and very logical-minded skills. Where I think a lot of the reason that we have games that are about systems interacting is because it's made by nerdy white guys like me. And as we make tools that are more expressive, I think that will make it much easier for people to get into the industry and to create their own games.
Well, and all the tools are way more sort of democratized than they used to be. I mean, when I joined the industry, it was all, 5-figure SGI, workstations and software that you had to have a license for that also cost, tens of thousands of dollars. So the fact that, if somebody's motivated, the tools, you're holding one in your hand right there. You've got a computer in your hand. The tools are at our fingertips now.
Yeah, I don't need a notebook.
So, obviously that isn't to dismiss, economic barriers and things like that. But I'm looking forward to seeing more voices and more diversity because these things are so democratized, and it can only get better, I think.
And I think it's definitely starting to happen, the better tools and then the better platforms.
Yep.
Yeah. Sam, you agree?
Yeah, and I think there's an amount that needs to be done as well, just in terms of leading things, in terms of the characters you see on screen, because you grow up, and if you see yourself represented on screen, it makes something feel like it's for you. It makes it feel like, oh, I could tell my story here. And I, in somewhat recent times, remember very awful conversation in boardrooms in which I was told that the ethnicity of certain characters was not going to play with certain markets, and or who would be interested in playing this character in this genre. And I think some of the more useful movements and things like the Me Too movement hopefully mean that it's a lot more awkward to express those positions in boardrooms these days. But yeah, we just need to, I mean, that was one of the things for me with Her Story was the characters you can tell stories about in games for so long has been so limited. The genres, the types of story you can tell. So the more
the
we
hairstyles
do to expand that.
I mean, literally, the hairstyles, you couldn't tell stories about people with certain kinds of hair. Those barriers are coming down.
Right. So the E3 is about you guys. So do you have any questions? Anybody? Sure, yeah.
Do you still think there's a need for cutscenes in games? Do they still have their place?
Sure, I think they're a tool like anything else, right? I mean, when they get vilified as being kind of a, a lazy shortcut, the thing is there's things that we can do using cinematic language in terms of proximity to characters, framing, composition, that, we've all been trained to read. That doesn't mean that we should ape cinema by any means. I mean, you do what's right for your game. But it's really hard to try to orchestrate kind of an emotional response when you don't have control over the camera, right? Which is a challenge, right? For like VR, for instance, it's a big challenge, and it also opens up the issues of the player being naughty and deliberately making things look stupid, and it's very hard for us to have AI work around that.
So we have time for one more really quick one. Anybody? Okay, yell it out. Wait in the back there.
Hi. What do you think is the ideal length for a narrative in a video game? And do you think whatever length you say is conducive to a 3-act or 5-act structure, or do you think it's different?
So the question was, what's the ideal length for narrative in a game?
Any
I
length.
think just beyond the Steam refund window, sufficient buffer. I think that there is no answer to that question, but I think for a very long time we've been encouraged to make longer and longer video games. I know that, again, like the business logic is we're still in a scenario where we are selling AAA games for $60+ with season passes to people that have paid $500 for a box. You do focus tests, you're told this thing therefore has to last me 30, 40, 50 hours. If you have a story, it probably could be told in a shorter amount of time.
It probably should be, actually.
Yeah,
It should be. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to see cheaper games with shorter runtimes without the padding. I would love to not have to break for 20 minutes combat just to get the runtime and the
Well,
sense
the sad
that this
thing
was
is,
a big game.
as a fan of these games and as a gamer, I never get to see the ends of these stories, right?
Right.
Life's too
I mean, that's
busy,
the
right?
big
That's-
thing when you work within the games industry and you see the statistics and you're told 20% of people saw the end of this game,
Yeah.
30%.
People design around it. They go, oh, well, 11% of people will see the end of the game, so don't spend a lot of resources on it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's terribly cynical, right?
Yeah, my last Silent Hill game we had as a mantra, it's like we're telling this story which has a structure to it and it has an ending.
Yeah.
We really, really need to get players to that ending. So things we're doing that are going to stop that, we need to smooth those.
Yes,
So I have the
short,
I have
any
the,
length.
I have the unenviable task of
Wrap it up.
please wrap it up. It's blinking back there of ending a conversation just as it's getting good, really good. So I just want to tell everyone that the narrative is not going anywhere. Single player is not going anywhere, as this is proven. So thanks to our panel. Thank you so much, Amy Hennig, Sam Barlow, and Ian Dallett. Yeah.